Shwmae pawb, hello everybody, and welcome to my Wild Welsh garden, and welcome to my tour of the garden in May. So a lot has changed since the April garden tour, mainly due to the weather. As you can see, blue sky. Yes, it's suddenly changed from wet, cold, miserable weather, wintry weather, to summer, almost overnight. And then we had a week of very warm weather, and now it's kind of more seasonal, it's changeable, and it hasn't stopped raining. Of course, this is Wales, but not nearly as much rain as we were having before. So without further ado, we'll start on the garden tour. So we'll start just outside the back door. There's the lovely azaleas in flower. There should have been a couple of salmon pink ones next door, but I'm afraid the frost got those. And over here, this is a bit of a sorry sight. In the middle there is a cherry which hasn't come into leaf properly. It is still alive and it does have some sprouts, so I'm just going to leave it and see what happens. And next to it is the eucalyptus, which I pruned hard back, as you can see, and I did think I'd overdone it and killed it, but there are sprouts coming, so I think it's going to recover. I seem to remember it looked like that last year as well. And below that is Viburnum bodnantense. I think that's how you pronounce it. And I have pruned that back. That also didn't come into leaf, but it does have some sprouts. So I've pruned it back to some healthy looking sprouts, and we'll just hope it recovers. And then here is a witch hazel which has done something similar, but I think it is coming into leaf now slowly, so fingers crossed that will recover too. And then down here are the aeoniums that have come out of the house for their summer holiday. They like it down, or they seem to like it down here, because it's sort of semi-shaded really. So they'll live there now until probably the end of September. This is a strawberry planter that I've planted up with bird's foot trefoil, which is a native plant. And I'm really pleased that the little plants seem to be growing, and I've even seen some little flowers. So we go up the steps to the main part of the garden. To the right here is the lawn. I'm halfway through No Mow May, and it is looking very long and shaggy. All the dandelions, no, most of the dandelions have turned into clocks now, but the daisies are still flowering. The next thing, of course, is the clover. That will come into flower soon. And at the end of May, I really don't know what I'm going to do, whether I'm going to cut it or leave it to grow long, but we'll see. For those who are not familiar with it, the idea of No Mow May is that it gives chance for the plants, the weeds in your lawn, to flower and provide pollen and nectar for the early insects. And long grass is also a really good habitat for lots of different sorts of invertebrates and even some vertebrates like reptiles and amphibians. But then what happens to them at the end of May? You've provided a home for them for a month and then take it all away by getting the mower out. Where do they all go? Do they just die? So there's also a movement for No Mow Summer, which is leaving at least some areas of your grass long all summer to provide homes for all these different creatures. This climbing rose on the old gate here has such a lot of flower buds. And these are just flower beds. They were conventional flower beds, but this year, where I've had a space, I've tried to put native plants in. They're still quite small, most of them. These Welsh poppies are all over the place. They're native plants, of course, wildflowers. And this is an oxeye daisy, which I planted, which is just coming into flower. There are quite a few of the wild foxgloves coming up. They're all self-sown. And an orange Welsh poppy there. And in this middle bed, there are lots of these granny's bonnets or aquilegias. In this bed, they're mostly different shades of purple, from very dark purple to not quite so dark purple, and one pink one. And more in this top bed. And in addition to that, there are Japanese anemones and phloxes and heucheras and geraniums, and there are roses and euphorbia and astrantia. And I've got roses and honeysuckle climbing up the trellises. This is the most loveliest honeysuckle. It's very slow growing. I'm sure that's been there 5 years, and it's only made 5 foot, 4.5 foot. But the flowers are just lovely. They're just coming out at the moment. And there's some more on this side, on the shady side. And then there's more roses, more honeysuckle. And then through the rose arch to the top of the garden. This is the breakfast room. You can see there's some more orange Welsh poppies down there. And of course the forget-me-nots are still going, still making this blue haze. I have quite a lot of this pop-up geranium, I call it. I don't know what it is, but they pop up all over the garden, obviously self-seeded, and the bees like them. And I have a ground-covered geranium here, which the bees are still visiting. It's still flowering. It's been flowering since March. And here I've got some native plant. There's some red campion here and some sweet Sicily. This here, the flowers are going over now, and it's starting to produce some seed heads. And they're quite nice to munch, actually. They have a nice aniseed flavour. You want to eat them when they're green, because they get a bit crunchy when they turn brown. And these are the wildflower or native plant seedlings that I put up here out of the way of the slugs. Most of them I've planted out now, but these are the ones that are still a little bit small. And the reasoning behind having native plants is that I think studies have shown that it doesn't really matter what flowers you have, that pollinators are happy with native and non-native flowers. But if you're looking for food plants for insects and invertebrates, and particularly the caterpillars of the adults that we want, like the butterflies and the moths, then you really do need to have native plants. And then behind the greenhouse, there is this hydrangea and also a white buddleia that I've allowed to grow into a tree. And behind the greenhouse, most of the primroses have gone over. Wild strawberries are coming out now, and another pop-up geranium. And then down there is the hedgehog house, which I do believe is in use. I don't know whether he's living in there or just visiting, but I filmed him taking leaves in there one night. And then this central bed here I call the orchard because it has 2 apple trees and a pear tree, and then an understory of some soft fruit. And just at the moment it also has a lot of Granny's bonnets. Dark purples, mid purples, pinks, light pinks, dark pinks. What I shall do is, as soon as they finish flowering, I shall cut them down. Otherwise, I will be completely submerged in Granny's bonnets next year. And Welsh poppies, of course. And another pop-up geranium. And this plant with a yellow flower, I'm really not sure what it is. Other than that, it is some sort of perennial vegetable. I bought it, several years ago, and I can't remember whether I bought it as a plant or sowed seeds. But yeah, it just sat in the ground and did absolutely nothing as a tiny little thing for a long time, and then suddenly this year it's grown up and flowered. And I can't remember what it was. So I can't remember which bit of it you eat, or all of it. And there's another one here. And in the corner of the orchard, the angelica is flowering. I've had to stake it very severely because they're very top heavy. And it's way taller than I am. And although the flowers are green, they're very attractive to insects. We'll just take a quick look in the greenhouse. I've planted out the tomatoes and the aubergines. I've still got plenty of salad here, which I'm cutting. But there's a tomato and there's an aubergine. And over here are the strawberries that are just beginning to ripen. And on the staging here, various seeds. Runner beans, French beans, courgettes, different sorts of brassicas, broccoli, sunflowers, cosmos. That's purple sprouting broccoli and Brussels sprouts. And then some chili peppers and some pumpkins. Last but not least, some sweet corn. So coming out of the greenhouse, we're at the top of the garden. There are the raspberries, the autumn raspberries behind, that I've pruned in a different way than I would normally prune autumn raspberries. I've just sort of tidied them up so they're going to flower all summer and be better for the birds that way, I hope. And then in front, some summer raspberries, which really do not look at all happy. So I don't quite know what I'm going to do about those. And then down here, the rhubarb, which has had its sort of first flush and now it's having a rest. And then my native hedge along the back here, which is lovely and green now, and it's really thickening up and makes me feel, quite sort of secluded in my little flowery green bubble. And here is this lovely native honeysuckle, which looks so pretty, and it smells just gorgeous first thing in the morning. And then down there, along what used to be an access path, I've planted some more hedge plants, and they've all come into leaf, so that's encouraging. They'll grow up and make the hedge even thicker. And then this is the bed with the old pond in, and you can see a couple of yellow flag irises just coming out into flower. And then down here is the hibernaculum. This is a place for amphibians and reptiles and other creatures to spend the winter, to hibernate in. And you can see where the sparrows have been bathing in it, but it doesn't seem to be getting any smaller, so I think maybe it will survive. And then lots of little weeds and wildflowers have started to germinate, so that's encouraging. And as this is going to be the wilder part of the garden, there's quite a few bits and pieces of wild flowers, native plants that I've put in here. There's a few grasses, a couple of thistles, different sorts, evening primrose, St John's wort, another pop-up geranium. And that's a very strategically placed chair right at the top of the garden that I can sit in and look at the view and just give you a bit of explanation. I started wilding my garden in response to the awful decline that there's been in all our animals and plants, particularly here in Wales. Everything is in decline, and some things are on the verge of extinction that used to be quite common. And it's very easy to get despondent and despairing, and I thought, well, rather than do that, I would see what I could do about it. So the idea of wilding my garden was to make as many different habitats for as many different animals and plants as I possibly could. Not just to sort of attract animals and plants into the garden, but to give them a home to live in. So if they were an invertebrate, for example, that they could complete their life cycle here. And in that way, I thought, well, I should be doing a small thing towards the restoration of nature. And of course, if we all did something small, it would make a big difference. And the reason why I started this channel, my Wild Welsh Garden, was really in response to something that a well-known television gardener said on a very well-known television gardening programme about wildlife gardening. He said it was very difficult. He said it was possible, but it was very difficult. And in order to have a garden that was good for wildlife, but also good for people, in other words, that people would actually want to be in and spend time in, you needed two essential ingredients. One was very good garden design, and the other was very good horticultural skills. And I thought, well, that's not right, because first of all, you're going to put people off, because most people are going to think, well, I haven't got either of those, so I can't do it. And also, I honestly don't think it's true, because I haven't got either of those either. This garden wasn't designed, and I'm not a garden designer. And I don't have any horticultural skills over and above what any other ordinary person has. So that's the challenge that I've set myself, really. Can I make a garden that's good for wildlife and also good for people, that will be beautiful and that people will want to come and spend time in? So if you're interested in that sort of thing, please subscribe to the channel, and I'd love to have your company on my journey learning to wild my garden. Look at those pesky sparrows bathing in the potatoes. And again, this is, quite a conventional flower bed, really. Apart from, as spaces have arisen, I've started putting native plants in. So I've put some knapweed over there next to the pond, but there's geraniums, different sorts of geraniums, there's asters, there's roses, there's also now some wild foxgloves and an evening primrose, and something that I never thought I would do over there by the water butt there's a nettle, which seems quite happy. The vegetable beds are still empty, still surrounded by this lovely blue haze. I've planted the sweet peas out, but they're not actually doing anything yet. There's a row of potatoes here. This is blue Annalise. It's just beginning to come up there. This is where the sparrows were bathing. And then there's lots of self-seeded nasturtiums there, and a couple of self-seeded borage, which I'll dig up and put somewhere else other than right in the middle of the bed. And there's some more potatoes here. These are pink fir apples, which I've never grown before, so I'm very interested to know what they're going to be like. At the back there are foxgloves, which are just about to come out, and then there's a row of autumn raspberries, which are looking good. These are the ones that I'm intending to harvest because I cut these right down in the winter. And then there's a lot of this dove's foot cranesbill, which is a weed. It's a wildflower, a native plant, and a prolific self-seeder. And previously I've just always pulled it up, but this year I haven't, and it looks very pretty with the forget-me-not. I have pulled some of it out where I thought it was competing with the raspberries, because I don't want that to happen. There's a patch of dwarf comfrey here on the corner, and this has been flowering since March, and the bees are still visiting it. In fact, there I think is a hairy-footed flower bee. Yes, I'm very pleased with myself that I've actually seen one. I've heard about them so much, and actually managed to identify it. So we go down the side of the garden and then through that gap onto the lawn. And here there's a mixture of native plants and cultivated plants. There's some red campion there, which is a native plant. There's London Pride, which is cultivated. There's a couple of wild foxgloves that are just about to come out. Japanese anemone there, some more London Pride, some geraniums, of course, and there's some bugle down there that the bees are still visiting. So we go in between a native hawthorn and a native blackthorn over some stepping logs, past another honeysuckle which is growing up over the summer house, through onto the lawn, and then you can see it from the other way round. Into the sun, I'm afraid, because it's getting towards evening. And this flower bed over here again is very conventional. It's got geraniums, it's got phlox, it's got a rose, there's the Welsh poppies and the pop-up geraniums, and then there's some verbascum and phyllictrum, which are just about to come out. And then in there somewhere, oh yes, I can see it, between the evening primrose and the verbascum, there's a nettle, which I planted in a pot. So I planted that one in a pot, and then at the top of the garden, next to the water butt, that nettle isn't in a pot. And the idea is that I see how they do and compare the two and decide which is the best way of growing nettles in my garden. There's another pop-up geranium here. It's kind of in the shade, but it's a very delicate sort of mauvey pink. It's lovely. In my April garden tour, I was a bit worried about my trees, but this one's fine, I think. This is a rowan, and it seems to have come out into leaf, and it seems to have quite a few flowers on it. And this tree seems okay too. It's a pink hawthorn, and all the leaves seem to have come out okay. And it also seems to have quite a few flowers on it. And I think it'll be the first time it's flowered. And in this bed here, down by the side of the summer house, the pulmonaria is still flowering and it's still being visited by bees. This is the new pond, which has sort of cleared a bit. I have taken some weed out and the plants are growing, and around the edges I've sowed it with meadowgrass seeds and the seeds have all germinated. I've also put in some wildflowers. There's some oxeye daisies there and red campion. On top of the shed and climbing up the arch is another native honeysuckle, which is really looking lovely at the moment and smelling lovely first thing in the morning. And another buddleia just behind it, which again I've allowed to grow into a tree. So we go down and past the woodshed, more geraniums, past this Weigelia, which is flowering. I didn't put that in, that was here when I came. And the clematis climbing up the other side of the arch to the polytunnel. And I sowed around the polytunnel with meadowgrass. This side is in the shade, but I think you can see that it's all germinating. And when all this grass has grown long, I shall leave it like that. I won't cut it at all, and this will be my long grassy area around the polytunnel and also around the pond, because long grass is a really good habitat for so many different creatures, invertebrates and vertebrates, and hopefully they'll be able to come and find a home here all year round. And then looking down this side of the polytunnel, the grasses are germinating and this fabulous hydrangea is coming out that just smells wonderful. Everything in the polytunnel is growing away. There's some broad beans there, some tomatoes charred from last year that's bolting, and some more broad beans. And what I'll do with these, as they've got so tall now, I'll just nip the tops off. They've got several sets of flowers. I don't think they can produce any more beans. I just nip the top off there. And that does two things. It stops the black fly coming onto the plant because they do tend to go for the tips first. And the other thing is it gives me some tea because I can cook it as a vegetable. And there's the lovely sound of dripping water. It's a lovely, gentle, relaxing sound. And I've got one of these drippy hoses. This was given to me by my next door neighbour over the road. He's a tree surgeon and he planted a hedge and this was watering it for a year. And then he put it in his shed thinking he might use it one day. And he never did, so he gave it to me. And you know, it's been the best thing because I've got it sort of attached to an outside tap and there's a couple of aubergines down there and a couple of cucumbers. And I just switch it on for 20 minutes in the morning. And yeah, so no more lugging great watering cans full of water or standing there with a hose getting soaking wet. Bees there, not looking fabulous, I do have to say. Germination's not been good. But it doesn't really matter. I find peas never actually make it into the kitchen. I just eat them as I'm walking around the garden. And in the corner there, there's a lovely Welsh poppy and a self-sown snapdragon, just for a bit of colour, cheer the place up. And Mr. Snail out for his morning stroll. What a cheek. So now we go back down the slope to the back door. And we've been right round the garden. So, thank you for visiting me again in my wild Welsh garden. Thanks for your company, and I'd love to see you again. So I'll see you in the next video. Bye. Hwyl fawr.